Mr. Speaker, this budget is a lost opportunity. And I will start by asking the very basic question. Where is resilience, recovery, and sustainability to build back better? Our friends will say that government is government and government so decides. And it has decided in favor of the corporate sector. It has decided to exempt corporate sector from its massive land tax obligation. It has decided to turn its back on people who think everything is allowed and everything goes. I'm sure the Honorable Minister of Education has taken cognizance of what has recently happened at the MES in relation to paper being leaked. I think this is a very serious matter, and I would have expected a statement to be made by the Honorable Minister of Education, because we are talking of so many families who are concerned, and of course, that has created not only a climate of uncertainty, but there's no trust in an institution which conducts exams. And what is being done, Mr. Speaker, as I said, to reassure parents, teachers, and students? One suspension does not solve the problem. It's the very foundation of education that has been shaken and stirred. And I expect government to come and react and take appropriate measure. So when there's erosion of confidence, how can we build a nation, Mr. Speaker, and help recovery and give resilience and sustainability to build back better? Mr. Speaker, the regime is a mere tenant and living on borrowed time, and if fundamentals are not addressed, government will continue to allow the rupee to depreciate for tax buoyancy and growth, except that it is not real growth and will lead to descent into social chaos. Under the MSM government, the economy is like a cockpit of a crashing airliner where the dashboard lights are all flashing red. It is precisely because it is heading for a crash that the minister announced a breaking news yesterday on radio. Government has decided to partially privatize Metro Express Ltd. Now, if this is management of economy by the best Minister of Finance of Africa, then there is deep-seated concern. One may say it's economy stupid. Mr. Speaker, the budget is not with the people and for the people. Putting an inflated price before people is not shared prosperity. It is shared poverty. 40% of the poorest section of the population is being let down. The climate of uncertainty and unpredictability also contributes to the high prevalence of anxiety and depression in the population. I grant you, Mr. Speaker, our situation is a far cry from Sri Lanka, which has a huge external debt, and unlike Pakistan, which has an import cover of 2 months. In Sri Lanka, civil servants are given a day off to plow the land in an effort to produce more of what we eat and to eat what we produce, to reduce the import bill. In Pakistan, people are urged to drink fewer cups of tea to keep the country's economy afloat. It's an important bill for them, and is as high as $600 million US for tea. As a net food, feed, fuel, and fertilizer importing country. If there is no sound economic management of external debt, of public debt, external debts will escalate and will impact upon our investment grade. External stability is threatened by worsening trade and current account imbalances. Consequently, the rupee is being weakened and foreign exchange reserves are being depleted. And it will accentuate with the rise in the interest rate of the US dollar. Mr. Speaker, sir, we must never lose sight that we are one notch above junk. As we say, although it's a long, long way to Tipperary, but we are not too far from either. We are not too far either from the Sri Lankan pogrom. Mr. Speaker, these budget proposals come from the weakest government that this country has known since independence. You want me to say it again? These budget proposals come from the weakest government that this country has known since independence. It's a web of bluff. Economists have rung the alarm bell and remind the regime that we are living on borrowed time, borrowed money, as if there's no tomorrow. And we're inching closer to the brink of an economic collapse. Mr. Finance, either you reverse policy, or you maintain the trend, and if we know what the consequences would be on the weak, the poor, and the restless, Mr. Speaker. Because at the end of the day, people need money to buy basic commodities. We are putting great expectation on tourist arrival. Unfortunately, the tourism rage travel might be affected given the slowdown in our main markets coupled with rising interest rate. The rise of the interest rate in the US will impact on our balance of permanent currency, and rupee is on the constant decline. So, Speaker, this is the time when we would have expected government to switch gear and move towards a more focused and structured investment program. But year in, year out, public sector investment program is on the downtrend in relation to massive shortfall. And this is what happened year in, year out. The root causes of delayed project is due to arbitrary and selective choice of contractors. Yesterday, I was quite surprised in relation to the question put by the leader of the opposition to the minister responsible for national infrastructure, who was unwilling to disclose basic information to the community in relation to an acquisition of land. Access to information regarding flood-prone areas on natural drainage path is a right. I still can't understand why the reply was not forthcoming and why the minister concerned felt that the information is sensitive and he was indifferent to the appeal made by the leader of the opposition. Why? Who are the special beneficiaries of this privileged information? Information is knowledge and power. Unless the information is disclosed to the cronies to speculate of land, but you know, when there is opacity and non-transparency is a guaranteed downfall. And the focus of the budget is on land speculation, the right of those who have residence permits to acquire property subject to contribution of 10% to solidarity levy. Mr. Speaker, at a later stage, I will come to the Festival de la Terre. Why, at a time when poverty is rampant, why have they eliminated the 4.8 billion subsidies on basic commodities? It's inappropriate, and I still can't understand. I hope the minister has not cowed down to big importer traders who have threatened to disrupt the supply. À qui profite le crime? It's a lèse-majesté, and the outcome is to make the poor poorer. And there is a big price to pay for misleading the information. I have here an interview given by the president of the Association pour la protection de l'environnement et des consommateurs, who stated very clearly, l'allocation de 1000 roupies sur les salaires partira en fumée. Indeed, the 1,000 rupees dispensed as financial support has already been sucked into the vortex of inflation which is a tax without legislation, first and foremost on the poor, the weak, the vulnerable, the widows, the orphans, the unemployed, and the middle class. Mr. Speaker, the inflation is a spit-fired dragon that has to be slain. It is not because almost 70% of our inflation is imported that it would be difficult to mitigate. But the Bank of Mauritius cannot be the errand boy of the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we've said right from the outset that the cure is worse than the disease. And I was shocked to hear from several members on the government bench that the raid on the Bank of Mauritius was justified, irrespective of the if the internal reserves of the bank run dry. This government is a proponent of high fiscal deficit. And the more financing from the Bank of Mauritius will plunge the economy deeper into an inflationary spiral. It's like pouring fuel to a roaring fire. Mr. Speaker, not a single week goes by that the rupee is not depreciated. Inflation is 12%, and food inflation of 18% is a tax, as I've stated, without legislation, which is the poor, the vulnerable, and the middle class harder. Poverty and costs of living and crisis is a living reality. There are people eating not more than a meal a day, and it has become a treat for many. Mr. Speaker, since 2015, the policy has been one of depreciation of the rupee. They never prepare for the worst and hope for the best. They forget that there's no free lunch. They have put sound economic management on the back burner. In the face of world crisis, the minister opted for the easy option. This is the reason why the regime raided the bank, not of a one-off of 60 billion rupees, but a total amount of 158 billion, which is indeed a super bonanza for the raiders. The raid, Mr. Speaker, sir, has not stopped for the financial year 2021-2022. An additional of 25 billion was transferred from the Bank of Mauritius to the account of government via the MIC. The regime snubbed the recommendations of the IMF, which stressed in the name of governance the Bank of Mauritius should stop financing fiscal expenditure. The Minister of Finance, the Minister of Financial Services earlier explained the relevance and importance of being delisted, of course, from the EU blacklist and the Financial Action Task Force. And there are lessons to be drawn from this. That's why the Bank of Mauritius cannot be the errand boy of the Ministry of Finance. And the demarcation line between fiscal and monetary policy has to be cleared. We must not be indifferent and insensitive to World Bank and IMF and Moody's credit ratings as we're under the constant watch. The role of the Bank of Mauritius is to stabilize the currency and make it available without delays or queuing. As of now, there's a tacit measure of foreign exchange control by the Bank of Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, the vault of the bank has been raided, and it's not members of the opposition who are saying it. That was clearly spelled out by former governor of the central bank, Mr. Bassantroy. And you're not going to say that he's a demagogue or anti-patriot. His concern is inflation, the precursor to cost of living crisis. Mr. Speaker, where the stabilization account of the State Trading Corporation, ripped apart by the Minister of Finance as part of the rip-off policy of the regime. I agree, part of the profits of state-owned enterprises should be credited to the consolidated fund, but not at the expense of the stabilization account or pension scheme. And I see no reason why the price of petroleum products couldn't have come down by at least 3 rupees. The charges for the construction of a storage tank and the cost of vaccine in the price structure no longer arise. The price of fuel is a triggering variable in the economy of Mauritius. The price of many mass-consumed products is indexed to the price of fuel, and reducing the latter would have caused a snowball effect on related products, liberating additional income for the household and business, thus mitigating the loss of purchasing power due to inflation. Mr. Speaker, coupled with the 1,000 rupees income support, this would have brought some fresh air to the suffocating population. Let me tell inflation-loving regime, patience of the population is wearing thin. In April of this year, it was announced that CB finances are on the red, and one can expect an increase in tariff of up to 12%, if not more. Besides increase in tariff, I hope the CB Staff Association realizes that the pension of its staff is at risk. Mr. Speaker, those at the helm, after squandering 18 billion rupees on BI and the 6 billion rupees on Betamax, and raiding the Bank of Mauritius of 158 billion rupees, cannot get away with murder. The next vote is the contribution sociale généralisée. After the raid on the central bank, its pension scheme for workers, which is under siege, and the fiscal deficit of the contribution sociale généralisée, which is a tax, means that those who are 40 years old, 45 years old today, will find it hard to have their full entitlement on retirement. Mr. Speaker, under the Labour government never raided the Bank of Mauritius, never cream off the profits of state-owned enterprises, or tamper with National Savings Fund or National Pension Fund in the face of crisis. Crisis was never a justifiable reason, be it during the oil and energy crisis of 79-82 and the global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. Even under force majeure, clear policies and guidelines have to be established by central bank. Reserve Bank of India was a pacemaker during the pandemic, an example which Bank of Mauritius could have emulated. A one-off is a one-off, even then it is a loan and not a grant. That's why IMF has impressed upon government for unutilized MIC money to be returned to the central bank. Ask yourself one simple question. Why will the regime of Pravin Jagnnath not return the unutilized MIC fund to the Bank of Mauritius? It's a war chest for their bonanza. Of course, the minister will say it's the business of the Bank of Mauritius. It is big business indeed. The Mauritius Investment Corporation, a company wholly owned by the Bank of Mauritius, has recently been involved in a property deal worth over 4,500 million rupees. Just for comparison's sake, the famous Illovo deal was a mere 1,600 million rupees. MIC is the be-all and the end-all of the Festival de la Terre, bailout of toxic companies, and quasi-participation in entities like hotels, Airport of Mauritius at the exorbitant prices. It acquired 427 acres of omnicane land at overvalued price of 10,500,000 an acre, and acquired land from Medine Sugar Estate near pig farming at La Chaumière at more than 4.2 million per acre, Mr. Speaker. So we are talking of 144 acres for 620 million rupees. The land has poor drainage and wastewater accumulates. Amazing that Mauritius Investment Corporation was not diligent to find out about the suitability of the land. Where are the findings of DOMA report on flood-prone areas? Mr. Speaker, who will bail out the distressed small plot owners of sugarcane mired in debt? MIC reserved for the privileged members who will line up the pockets and the war chests of our friends on the other side. The TUC, Mr. Speaker, sir, the upper class exclusive club, this is what MIC is all about. Yes, we know that small planters are desperate to be fairly remunerated on the sale of a ton of sugar. On the other hand, the corporate is exempted from tax payment on land transaction. But who will exempt the small landowners? Never has there been such a scandalous transaction, sold 5 times the actual market price. Why has the chief government valuer kept at arm's length? In the past, when the Bank of Mauritius had compulsorily acquired property in its vicinity, the valuation was conducted by the then chief government valuer, and on the one occasion, there was a departure from the then governor of the bank, late Mr. Ramphal. He had conveyed an apology and corrective measure was taken. Where is accountability and transparency? At a time when the public coffers are empty and government is desperately scrambling to lay hands on funds to meet its commitments, the public has a right to know and to put the right question on the mega deal. Why did MIC spend such a colossal sum in buying properties for which the MIC is clueless as to what to do with the land? How are the prices determined? Does it represent the real market value of the land? Did MIC seek the advice of a competent, experienced valuer or that of the government valuation department on the true value of the land before embarking on such a massive acquisition? If the answer is yes, can the experts' report be made public? Or did MIC merely rely on the price asked by Medine Limited and Omnicane, no doubt based on the sugar state's expert opinion? Mr. Speaker, a cursory look at the Omnicane sale indicates that the prices paid by MIC are grossly inflated. Some years back, you know very well that the SIFB Sugar Insurance Fund Board bought land at Trianon for 110 million rupees. And following a public outcry, a fact-finding committee under Judge Ojaib concluded that SIFB paid an inflated price for the land. Several officials had to resign, and charges of corruption were laid against them. Mr. Speaker, the sum involved in the Sugar Insurance Fund Board is indeed peanuts compared to that of the MIC. Finally, whenever a person sells land, he has to pay land transfer tax at 5% of the price. On the price of 4,500 million, the tax due to government by Medine and Omnicane is 225 million rupees, and both Medine and Omnicane Limited were exempted from payment of the tax, Mr. Speaker, and did not pay a cent as tax. Mr. Speaker, the public has a right to know whether they have been exempted. Why the public has a right to know why they have been exempted when this tax spares nobody. Whether you sell land to settle a debt or meet medical expenses or for the education of your children, the tax is inescapable. In addition, an unlucky 20,000 of sellers are subsequently claim additional tax and penalty for the so-called under-declaration value by the Registrar General. The Minister of Finance has an obligation to enlighten the public. And in view of the colossal sum of public funds involved, light should be shed in the name of transparency and accountability. This scandal of a big proportion called for a commission of inquiry. Mr. Speaker, tax is a tax, and the corporate has to pay its taxes. They always take and always find excuses to avoid paying taxes, or if they pay, it's minimum taxes that are being paid. Mr. Speaker, a weak government continuously plagued by scandals, each one more damning than the previous one. Government is politically obscene, a flagship of fraud and corruption. And it doesn't give a damn about negative outlook as long as the loot is shared. The broker who obtained 26 million rupees for 18 days of work is loitering in the corridor waiting to be appointed as transaction manager for the sale of 22 billion rupees worth of asset. Time will tell if the 22 billion rupees proposed equity sale to reduce public debt will ease off the nearly 100% of GDP as of June 2023. Unless there's wide discussion at the bar of public opinion, they have no right to dispose of the heirloom of the nation. Who will be the broker? Your guess is as good as gold. It's good to recall the appointment as independent commissioner on the Brigham Commission of Inquiry, while Mr. H.A. was at the same time providing services against fees in favor of NIC and the National Property Fund Limited, and also negotiated his payment of 26 million rupees for 18 days of work, which was previously refused prior to 2017. After 2017, for reasons which are obvious, the world became his oyster. Now you understand who's the preferred broker of the regime. They call it, let's share the loot. For the 22 billion revenue, they will put up anything and everything for sale. The broker will have a field day with the sale of the century. And what's up for sale? NIC, Port Services, Mauritius Telecom, perhaps Ecom, and the National Property Fund Limited. Bobek, I've been told, will be a giveaway in any shady deal because it's worth almost nothing. But then who will buy? The first to run, to offer, and to meet the requests of government would be, of course, MIC. And the Bank of Mauritius with its printing machine, MIC, Mr. Speaker. So this is the integrity and democratization in the parlance of the MSM. And the Prime Minister will chair the committee to fast-track the submission of projects. Mr. Speaker, if you pass by the door of the committee room, when meeting is on, lower your mask, take a deep breath, you'd feel the whiff of money, sir. As Machiavelli said, he who controls the fears controls the soul. But the regime had a dose of its bitter pill from Carlevier to Plaine Magnan. Beware of the silent majority. They are from the main street, the side street, the back street, and cul-de-sac or dead end. That's their dead end. And the Iran boys and girls of Pravin Jagannath MSM should know, when the tide recedes, the naked truth will be revealed. There is no escape. Mr. Speaker, a weak government which keeps oppressing our population with unnecessarily harsh police practices and unduly severe penalties. It is continuously raiding the population through COVID-19 prevention and sanitary measures regulations 2021. Appendix A of the budget speech shows that the raised revenue from fines, penalty, and forfeits was 100 million more than 2021-2022 budgetary estimates, and is expected to increase by 5% in the fiscal year 2022-2023. Mr. Speaker, a government whose politics is one of basic instincts, verging on hate and hell-bent to strike with vengeance, the rise of the cronies and blatant statements made by ministers with underlying communal overtones highlight the frailty of a regime. Ethnic democracy and autocracy gives a false sense of hope, an illusion of power. The power belongs to the people, and the people will stand united against mafia politics, money politics, fake news, and manipulation of public opinion. Obey and comply is the dominant philosophy of regime. Sadly, government backbenchers have to bend backwards to pay lip service to the leader of the House. Where is the freedom to express without fear or prejudice? Recent Freedom in the World reports noted declining trend in the index of political rights and civil rights since 2014. The shouting brigade of the MSM, if it has an iota of conscience and justice, should stand with the people, for the people, and not allow the corporate to have a field day. Those who are not lackeys, they should join us to wage war on fraud and corruption and to empower the poor. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the highlights of cabinet decision since the scandalous public disclosure of the horrible torture video, the Council of Ministers has remained totally silent on the unacceptable, inhuman treatment inflicted on a number of our citizens. And I will comment on this at a later stage. On page 54 of the budget speech, the minister has claimed that he's providing 10.9 billion in the police force in upholding law and order for one and all. In any civilized country, in the wake of the disclosure of scandalous torture video showing inhuman and degrading treatment being inflicted on individuals, the allocation of the budget of the police force would also have contained provisions to ensure the proper policing of police officers, because law and order is a matter for the people and the authorities. Yet, at paragraph 309, 323, the budget speech dealing with law and order, the minister has provided no budget whatsoever for the policing of officers or for the protection of suspects from inhuman and degrading treatment and from torture. This omission gives the impression that the Minister of Finance and the minority and weak government to which he belongs has no interest in preventing breaches and violation of human rights. Mr. Speaker, what have we seen instead? We have seen a commissioner of police who is reported to have said as follows at the end of last month on Top FM, vos catégoriques là, aussitôt qui nous gagne tout ban preuve, nous pouvons faire une enquête et vous promettre qui ban coupable pour faire face à une sanction qui m'a pensé nous pouvons avoir un signal très fort qui les autres n'a pas pu emboîter le pas. At the end of May 2022, therefore, while the minister was carrying out his pre-budgetary consultation, the Commissioner of Police did not apparently know that the horrifying torture video had already been remitted to his predecessors 2 years ago. And he realized under the budgetary measure that government has lamentably failed to take. Indeed, until last year, a code of ethics prepared by Transparency Mauritius for policemen used to be remitted to every police officer upon his being sworn in, but the government has stopped this practice. They did not think that police officers should have a copy of that code of ethics, or maybe they did not even think that police officers need a code of ethics. What could you expect of a government which has itself demonstrated on several occasions that it has no ethos? Therefore, I invite the minister to make budgetary provisions for the reinstatement of code of ethics prepared by Transparency International, which explained to police officers in detail the behavior and attitude which they should have towards the public, and also for reprinting the police instructions book, a practice and procedure manual which was so useful to police officers in older days. Indeed, time to bring in the Police and Criminal Evidence Bill, Mr. Speaker. In the same radio broadcast on Top FM, the Commissioner of Police is reported to have stated as follows. Et maintenant, on peut aussi dire, ban dimoun qui tient là en possession sa vidéo là. Vous êtes aussi coupable, plus coupable même, qui sa ban soi-disant policier qui fin faire ça là. Qui fait, vous n'êtes pas fin dénoncer à l'époque. Police Inspector Shivakuten, the spokesperson at the police press office, had been remitted a pen drive of the torture videos since 2 years back. Kisana Kipli Kupab. The other officer who's in the know is CCID Jangi. Should the budget provisions 2022-2023 not make provisions for efficient working CCTV camera everywhere in the police station? Mr. Speaker, who has left the Tazers, an illegal weapon at the station? Who had access to them? Members of the squad had never denied that this prohibited weapon was not used as an instrument of torture and poke at the genital and perineal areas of the victims. Notwithstanding physical and psychological torture, the person, of course, will be wrecked. How is it that the Prime Minister was kept in the dark? The CP, who is the holder of a constitutional post, meets the Prime Minister every day. Then, if this is so, heads have to roll. I have known many CPs, and they are too diligent and far from being flic en délire not to share this matter of grave concern with the Prime Minister. I've worked closely with one Prime Minister and several acting Prime Ministers. It's too serious to accept at face value that there had been dereliction of duties. Why is the IPCC waiting? Why is it waiting to call the spokesperson and the head of the CCID? The Independent Police Criminal Commission is and remains a toothless bulldog, and the Act has to be revisited to ensure its independence. Mr. Speaker, U.S. Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton, at the AGWA meeting in Nairobi in 2009, hailed Mauritius as a model of democracy, rule of law. All those who fub the chest to think the glory of Prime Minister Pravin Jagnnath, what is it that you are going to say to the victims and their kin? Our security and safety has been compromised. Our reputation as a safe destination has taken a huge setback. The wreck of Wakasho was not only an ecological disaster, but has shown our vulnerability and exposure from attacks, and I hope not terrorism attack from the sea. Our seabed is a thorn for drug trafficking. Prime Minister cannot always plead ignorance on safety and security. He cannot react tardily, Mr. Speaker. Now, quite obviously, there...
Will you have more? How many minutes more you will take?
I have 30 minutes more.
30?
How many? 21.
Would you like we break and...
Okay, we'll break. Okay.
So I suspend the sitting for 30 minutes? You'll be seated?
Mr. Speaker, before the break, I was saying that, I found it very strange that the Prime Minister was kept in the dark over the safety and security issue. Strange because I would have expected that the security advisor would have apprised him of this issue in relation to the horrible torture video. Now, not quite obviously there is, and it appears that there will be nothing to tie Prime Minister to this horrible torture video which will haunt the country for years to come. And you know, police officers, and pas moins de moindre, will come and state that the torture video were never brought to the Prime Minister's attention. However, if the current commissioner could come to the radio at the end of last month and state that the police inquiry would be open, when one had already started in 2020, one cannot be surprised that the Prime Minister said at the beginning of the month, I quote, "Me fait pas connaissance sa vidéo-là." What should a decent Prime Minister do? This is a serious matter, the gravity of which cannot be underestimated. We are talking of compromising on the safety of our state, its security, which is at risk, and of course security has been jeopardized, and yet the Prime Minister, who's Minister of Defense, Minister of Home Affairs, has been kept in the dark, has been ignorant, or either he was informed or then he had a loss of memory. But I expect the Prime Minister to come and make a formal statement. We are talking of security and safety of the country, and I expect also the advisor to live up to the experience of a nation. We are very worried over this issue. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to food diplomacy, or the cost of living crisis. And India is the leading player in food diplomacy and as a major supplier of wheat and rice is the power group broker and reliable partner of Africa to wage war on famine. The drought in Somalia and the Horn of Africa is making life difficult. Macky Sall, chairman of AU, flew to Russia to plead for a ceasefire and allow Ukraine to export wheat, seed, and rare elements from Ukraine. Our food bill is 45 billion rupees, and we need to revisit policies, harness our best resources to turn things around. No one owes us a living, and as an ocean state with microclimatic conditions, we have to adapt to the suitability of our land to produce what we eat and eat what we produce. There is unanimous agreement amongst the planting community and representative of agro-industry that we need to have coherent policies on food security. Mr. Speaker, I listened to Mr. Bikari of QPIP and Ms. Sezier highlighting the relevance and importance of agriculture and agro-industry and what measures needs to be taken to address shortcomings. And of course, there's plenty of room for improvement. Now, I make a plea to the Minister. Let us put an end to encroachment on prime agricultural land and demarcate the agricultural zone for smart agriculture and agro-industry. We have to make sure that the slogan "produce what we eat and eat what we produce" should not be a vain slogan, but it should be a total commitment. Mr. Speaker, there is no shortage of strategic reports on agricultural diversification, and Agricultural Policy Analysis Unit and all relevant services have to deliver. We are at war, waging war on food insecurity. The cost of living is escalating. But one question that begs an answer: where are the 1,000 hectares of promised land made by the Minister to set up cluster of diversification? State Land Development Company has entrusted more than 2,500 acres of land to the controversial land scope, and many acres are being abandoned. It had a cane production of 60,000 tons for several years. Not only have several acres been abandoned, but parcels of land have been distributed without any expression of interest. Mr. Speaker, and I consider this to be a scandal, a sell-off, and a loot and wasted opportunity for economies of scale, for regrouping, for productivity and competitiveness. State Land Development Company was renting interline and rotational crop for food production, for potato production, to cooperative societies and individual planters. It was also producing more than 500 tons of seed potato at one time. I consider it an opportunity to exploit land for more remunerative agricultural and agribusiness purpose. But land scope has failed lamentably in its food security policy. And lastly, I appeal to the regime to send an SOS to a proud son of our land, Mr. Roy, an expert in venture capital, to dispense sound advice on investment in modern agriculture. That's what he does, and is solicited by business entrepreneurs who are keen to invest in agribusiness on the African continent in a big way. Even our cross-border investment in food security has to be redeemed. Mr. Speaker, the sector, as I say, needs to be reinvented. And there is plenty of room to report progress. Today, smart agriculture, we talk of smart agriculture with computer control release of fertilizer, herbicide, water, etc. We have gone beyond what we call technology introductory diffusion scheme, and today we have to allow ideas to mature for research and development and add commercial value to it. Let me add to what Honorable Paul Béranger stated on the extended continental shelf, which when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, I and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Seychelles, we signed the agreement before the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. And he's right to talk of the potential of Sayamala as a carbon sink and potential for a trade emission. But it's also good to report that recently Seychelles and Mayotte have signed a fisheries agreement for fisheries in the region, and also to harvest tuna, as it's still a very lucrative business. Not to forget that we have to subscribe to sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, I'm not saying it's always easy. Mauritius used to export rice, low glycemic rice. The gentleman who used to produce the rice has moved to Tanzania because of economies of scale. But we have tremendous potential. It's a question of getting our act together, bringing the resourceful person, and have clear, coherent policy. Either we do it now or we forget about it. I grant you the investment can be heavy, but the commitment has to be full. Now, as far as livestock is concerned, I would invite government to seek advice from Fonterra in New Zealand, and draw from its expertise in livestock and milk production. But you know, livestock is not always eco-friendly. New Zealand announced a plan to tax sheep and cowbirds to address one of its biggest sources of greenhouse gases. The country had been criticized for not including agriculture in its emission trading scheme, when almost half of its emission, mainly methane, comes from this sector. There is an issue which, of course, is of concern, and it relates to C26 in the annex to the budget speech. Now, it relates to an amendment to Mauritius Cane Industry Authority. And if this amendment is brought, it may mean the demise of the sugarcane industry. I asked the Minister of Food Security, Agro-Industrial Food Security, to ponder wisely and come back to better senses. Mauritius Sugar Syndicate is an established body with a reputation second to none. There is no room for a third party or another authority, because what it will do, it will weaken the comparative and competitive advantage which Sugar Syndicate has at a time when sales of sugar depend on value addition to capture the remunerative market. I would appeal to the Minister not to spoil the broth. Even World Bank has praised the unique marketing position of Sugar Syndicate, whose marketing of sales, a committee comprised of 3 millers and 2 independent planters. It is a transparent syndicate, and its director has got a good reputation among sugar organizations at the international level. I hope this amendment will not be moved. There was a time when Omnicane was exercising undue pressure to sell special sugar to specific buyers in UK, but realized it was being misled. The issue will provoke a backlash within the industry. I appeal to the Minister not to try to make politics on such a sensitive issue. The sale of sugar is sweet with sugar syndicate, and we cannot make it bitter. If it's working, don't fix it. It markets our sugar special sugars, and sugar syndicate is the bastion of corporate and small planters, but the marketing syndicate, the representative of the sugar cane planting community. I sincerely hope we'll have the support of former ministers, especially Honorable Siratan, and I'm sure he will not remain indifferent or insensitive. His father, by the way, was the first chairman of the sugar syndicate as far back as 1979. Mr. Speaker, instead of tampering, also I would advise the, instead of tampering, I would advise the Mauritius Cane Industry Authority not to make life difficult and to address issues which are relevant in relation to the ethanol framework, which has to be updated, and the biomass, as was stated by Honorable Mohamed and Osman Mohamed and Parti, They need to sort out the mess on renewable energy. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank has released a report on reform of the sugarcane industry, and it's nothing that we don't know of. So we have to make sure that the proceeds from the sale of sugar obtained over the years from the sweat and tears of planters and workers of the sugar industry, these proceeds have to consolidate the sector. In fact, we have used the proceeds to widen the economic base, and today we are reaping the benefits of the outcome of this base, which has been enlarged. King sugar, indeed, it has a multifunctional dimension, best carbon dioxide cleanser, biomass to the IPP is much sought after for a multitude of byproducts, including the famous cane juice rum. It prevents soil erosion and runoff on slopey areas, especially on coastal areas. Mr. Speaker, I hope the Minister will give serious attention to the letter forwarded by the Mauritius Cane Agricultural Federation in relation to the permits that have to be effected to planters. And I'm sure this appeal will not fall on deaf ears, and in relation to molasses, bagasse, and butler's fees, the government, the Minister, will lend a sympathetic ear, because this is an outstanding issue, and it has to be resolved. Let me now come to the financial services. And I did ask the Minister of Financial Services to pay heed to what he announced, because he didn't comment in relation to paragraph 136 of the budget speech, which stated that to continue the overhauling of the financial services sector, government will adopt its legislative framework to converge the domestic and global business regime. This is a sector where there is no right seeker, but a sector of brain power, and we have, as opposition and government, to be fully committed to this sector. But people are worried because this has been mooted for some time, the convergence of the domestic and global business regime, but still not clear whether the convergence of both domestic and global business regime will mean the establishment of a unified integrated sector, or whether we will have different regime for each sector, but with convergence on some aspect of regulatory framework. I can understand pressures being borne upon us by OECD for harmonized tax regime for both types of companies. But we have the appeal made by operators that we need still separate regimes. So I'll leave it to Minister to give the thorough explanation to operators, and I'm sure they'll have good interactive session because this matter needs to be resolved. It's a matter of urgency, and I'm sure it will be addressed forcefully and in a meaningful manner. This is a sector which is fragile, but competitors are fierce. Our competition is fierce, and there's no shortage of competitors. Competition is becoming fierce. Rwanda and Gujarat International Financial Tech are two promising centers, and with the end of grandfathering, global business companies can place the investment in other low-tax jurisdictions. Besides, the G7 decision was taken to prevent tax avoidance by multinationals through base erosion profit shifting, and Mauritius will face the consequences of that decision. Usually, the multinational pay minimum tax level on the amount generated on the income in each of the jurisdictions where it operates. It has indeed to reinvent, and we cannot just be content with being a back office. The time is ripe to implement the findings of McKinsey report to add value to wealth and asset management. Mr. Speaker, we have traveled a long way. Since the days we relied only on one export. We've used the proceeds to widen the economic base, and today there's more resilience, but nothing can be taken for granted. I expect government to live up to our expectation. We cannot be a country which thrives on growth simply from consumption. We want positive growth not based on inflation and a tax buoyancy which is the outcome of inflation. Mr. Speaker, we need to reinvent, to re-engineer, to address, to face daunting challenges, but to turn those challenges into opportunities. On the opposition bench, we've made some valuable suggestions. We've been very forceful and persuasive in our arguments to rebut the arguments put forward by our friends on government bench. Mr. Speaker, the country belongs to all of us. But on cross-border issues, I've always made an appeal that we need to come together as one nation. No one owes us a living, and the days of preferences are over. We have to be more imaginative, more bold, and we have to reskill and upskill. Time to set our differences on cross-cutting issues, but we are ready to face them at in the next election, and we are ready, more than ever ready, and they will be taken aback in relation to the people who are going to be fielded to be candidates at the next election. As an opposition, we will come together. The country is calling upon us to come together as one opposition. And you cannot rest assured we will live up to the expectation of the people, because the people are sick and tired of the regime which is mired in corruption, which is decadent and filthy, and we have to put an end to mafia politics, to money politics, to manipulation and management of information, which certainly will cause this country to take a backseat. We want to be in the vanguard of development, and time has to come together, and opposition will live up to, as I say, to the expectation of people, and we shall deliver. Thank you very much.